The founders of the Debt Collective, which lives and breathes solidarity every day. She is the author of The People's Platform, which won the American Book Award, and the recent books Solidarity, The Past, Present, and Future of a World-Changing Idea, which seems very appropriate for this moment, and also The Age of Insecurity, Coming Together as Things Fall Apart, which many of you will remember as last year's Massey Lectures. So Astra, thank you so much for being here.
Okay, I was told I was starting down there with a handheld mic, but hello from up here. I'm going to just say a few informal words and then have a conversation to kind of try to bring some of the ideas and analysis that we've encountered today just down to a more grounded level. Like what can we actually do? What ideas can we walk out of this room? What actions can we take together? And how do we build the solidarity we've been talking about? I guess I want to say, so this has been so great and so insightful. I'm so happy to be here. One thing it made me think about is the idea of the long arc of fascism. That arc didn't just happen. That arc was organized, right? That arc was organized, as we've been talking about. People learned from each other. They traded lessons. They filled out spreadsheets. They forged what, in my book, Solidarity, I call reactionary solidarity. Because solidarity isn't always good. Solidarity can be neutral, right? Solidarity is a form of group cohesion. So it can be neutral, like we're Vancouverites, or it can be positive, the kind of solidarity we're aspiring to, which we call transformative solidarity in the book, or it can be incredibly destructive. So this idea of reactionary solidarity. And over time, the right learned lessons, from the history and practice of colonialism, from Jim Crow in the American South, and they also have learned lessons from the left. If you listen to contemporary right-wingers today, they are gleefully stealing from the left. They talk about that we're fun now, like the hippies used to be, right? They talk about Gramsci. They talk about what they've taken from our movements and how they're mirroring them back. I also, I think the conversation today about affect was so important, that there's an emotional component to all of this, and reactionary solidarity feels good to the people who are in it. It feels welcoming, right? People feel seen. They are talking to people who feel like they're losing status, they're not respected, they're speaking to young folks on the internet, and so we need to, I think, recognize that there's the hateful side, and then there's the side that is warm. I mean, I hear from people who are reporting on groups like Turning Point, which is I believe they have chapters on campuses here as well, sort of right-wing, Koch-funded student groups, where people end up having their social lives in those spaces. So we need to out-organize them by building transformative solidarity, and in my mind, transformative solidarity transforms us as we participate in it. It transforms us, the people we are in community with, and also aims to transform society. And I keep having conversations with people in this moment. I live in the United States, this desperate moment, and I think people really want there to be one neat trick to fight fascism, and I wish, right? But there isn't. There's all of us working from wherever we happen to be. So my work is with the Debt Collective, which is a union for debtors. I always wanted to be an activist since I was a kid, but I could not find my political home. I was also really shy. I would try to go to organizing meetings, and I didn't feel like I ever quite found my place. And that sort of changed at Occupy Wall Street, which is now ages and ages ago. But Occupy had a bunch of problems, like this drum circle that would not fucking quit. But my favorite sign at Occupy that I always quote said, "I love democracy more than I hate this drum circle." And so I went there and I met my people. I met so many of my people. It was a moment for us to come together under that big umbrella of the 99%. And it was where people were talking about their economic conditions, and I had just defaulted on my student loans, and it was the first place I ever said out loud, like, I fucking owe $42,000. I can't pay it. I will never be able to get out of this debt. I realized the people standing around me owed more than I did, right? I realized that I actually wasn't alone, that we had all of this in common. So there's one day that kind of changed things for me. So I Do you all know he was actually mentioned earlier, David Graeber, the anarchist anthropologist. So David was a buddy of mine, invited me there, and he wrote me in because I was kind of a filmmaker, and he was like, we're gonna make this propaganda video, so we got balaclavas, is that what they're called? Like the masks, right? We got a bunch of trash cans, and we burnt these fake death notices, and David and all these folks from Occupy were dancing around, and we had this manifesto that was like, we're the invisible army of defaulters. Every dollar we don't pay is a dollar stolen from the speculators and Wall Street, you know? We made this fun video, and I was like, okay, so we're making this ridiculous propaganda. This is fun, but like, so what, you know? How are we gonna change things? And this guy named Thomas said, you know what we need? We need a union for debtors. Just like workers have a labor union, just like tenants have a tenant union, we need a debtors union. And I was like, it was like a cartoon light bulb went off in my head, and I thought, wow, yeah, someone should do that. And I thought, y'all, you know, I'm a filmmaker, this isn't my job. And at a certain point I realized if I want this to exist, I need to help build it. And however, 10 years later, it has now taken over my life, and it has been one of the most interesting and rewarding things I've ever been involved in. And we set to work creating a new political constituency, and I think this is the work of solidarity. Today, in the United States, it's taken for granted that student debt is a political issue. We've won hundreds of billions of dollars of student debt cancellation. Thank you. We have been so successful that the right wing has made one of their priorities making sure it will never fucking happen again and people will be buried in debt forever, so we have to fight them by getting even bigger and more powerful. But at the time, you know, we had very modest ambitions, and it was not intuitive that even people who had student debt would see themselves as having something in common, right? That we could organize people from very different backgrounds, very different collegiate backgrounds, to demand full debt cancellation and free college, which is what it was. It definitely wasn't intuitive that student debtors would stand alongside medical debtors, or people with back rent, or people who owed school lunch debt, which is a huge thing in the US, or people who had payday loans, or probation debt, debt to the criminal justice system. We built those constituencies each time by inviting people in, by saying, we see you, we want you in this group. So one group we just invited in a way that was so powerful to me is older people, because when you hear the word student debt, you think young, but actually the fastest group of student debtors in the US is people over 60, because you're treated as disposable, you're fired from your job, you have to go back to school to have a second chance so you can work till you're 90 fucking years old, right? And we said, we see you, we want to make a caucus of older debtors. And suddenly these people were showing up at our virtual door, joining the meetings, and so it was our fastest growing caucus of these militant, mostly old ladies, who then went and were protesting at the Department of Education. And in the end, we won millions and millions of dollars of relief for these older folks before the change of the administration. So I just am saying solidarity is constructed, whether it's reactionary or transformative, and it takes a kind of imaginative leap. And for me, this has just been such an incredible learning experience and life-changing experience. And for me, my books are always inspired by practice. I'm someone who really despises the theory-practice divide. It is actually from my engagement with life predicaments, with movements, that I kind of come to engage ideas. So I wrote a book on democracy after Occupy Wall Street, because whenever I hear the chant, this is what show me what democracy looks like, this is what democracy looks like, my mind would go, is this what democracy looks like? So I wrote this whole book about it. Organizing with the Debt Collective, I realized that in my investigation of democracy, I had left out solidarity. I talked about equality, I talked about freedom, I talked about justice, but I just kind of used solidarity as a buzzword. And what I've come to believe is solidarity is actually a precursor of democracy. We cannot have democracy without solidarity, because solidarity is a relational concept. And that is an indictment of the Western political tradition, that we actually don't have a relational concept at the center. Many indigenous political traditions are much more conscious of the idea of being in relation, not just with other people, but with the natural world. It's more of a centerpiece. So, so that kind of inspired my thinking about solidarity. So I just want to say a few things about it, and then the idea is that we'll hear from folks in community with us who are building political organizations, who can speak to some of the challenges and some of the promises of solidarity. But a few things quickly. So as I said, solidarity is not spontaneous. It has to be organized. I would say solidarity is not unity. It bridges across difference. This is one of the wonderful things about it and one of the challenges of it. Solidarity is not unity. Solidarity is polarizing. It requires an us and a them. And that makes it risky because by choosing our enemies, we remake ourselves. And I think this idea of like who we're polarized against, who's in the we is really critical. Solidarity is not charity. It's not something that you do detached. You know, I think there's an element of self-interest involved in it. This is part of, I think, the power of debtor organizing is there are personal stakes. Solidarity is dangerous. That's why it is under attack. That's why it's being criminalized right now. And I think this is a kind of critical moment because I think we're actually having a kind of mass come to Jesus moment about solidarity, which is why you have people like David Brooks, who got a shout out earlier today in the New York Times calling for a big movement. The last thing I just want to say is that we talk a lot about the power of numbers, and I think it's really about the power of organized numbers, right? How can we get information and work as a political bloc? And that I think is one of the lessons of the last 5 years that I worry is being forgotten. So again, I'm sitting in the US and people are emphasizing the need to mobilize, to go out into the streets, to show force. But we had the biggest protests in history in 2020, 2021. What we need to do is build durable political formations that can keep people in formation, that can help people commit to strategies. And I think we do that sometimes by building really humble groups where we are, right? The front line of this crisis is everywhere. So I want to get that handheld mic, take it to the floor, and ask some questions of y'all. One thing I thought maybe to begin with, some folks have volunteered to talk is, we've heard a little bit about empathy today. And I think, who would say they know what empathy feels like? When you feel that empathy, I'd love to hear people reflect maybe on what does solidarity feel like, actually? How is that different? And what are some of the techniques of solidarity building that people find to be effective? What are the strategies people are employing now?
Okay, so Gabby's in the crowd and is going to be bringing mics to different orgs. Astra, do we have a mic for Astra? Astra.
Yeah.
Hello. I think I'm going to pass the mic first to someone from the Vancouver Tenants Union, if you want to tell us what solidarity feels like.
Hey. I'm a member of the Vancouver Tenants Union. My name is Mel. One of the biggest news I think I heard this year was our friends in the York Southwestern Tenant Union in Toronto did a 16-month-long rent strike in opposition of their landlord's rent increase. That means over 400 tenants across like 2 or 3 or 4 buildings or something did not pay rent to their landlord for 16 months collectively, and they won. Their landlord... Their landlord had to agree to a bunch of terms, and the rent increase was taken away, and that looked like solidarity to me, right? Like the fact that like people are willing to risk eviction with 200 of their neighbors in order to make sure that everyone can stay in their homes. And
Hello? Okay, yeah. How do you have a conversation? I mean, just that, the wonderful organizer Jay McAlevey would always say organizing is hard conversations and making the ask, right? So what is it like when you're knocking on a door and someone maybe doesn't want to hear?
That didn't come out of nowhere. What I'll say is the folks at York Southwestern spent like 5 years doing this. Yeah. It was throughout several different attempts, several marches, several rallies. At one point, they went to their landlord's office and brought like a bunch of rats that they've captured in their homes to their landlord's office, right? But it's escalation, right? And it's slowly through kind of like 5 years of like building kind of like relationships. But I think 2 or 3 blocks away from here, there's an SRO. It's called the Portland Hotel. It's like 8 floors, and for about 8 months, they did not have, their elevator did not work. And what happened was a bunch of people got really, really frustrated. People died in these places, and so people started saying, hey, we need to do something. They started knocking on each other's doors. They got together to a meeting, and they kind of, they talked about how we want to kind of like change things. And it was a long process, right? Like, it's a lot of like building relationships with one another. It's kind of like making sure that people trust each other enough to do these actions against a landlord that has so much power over your living situation, right? So it's door knocking constantly to your neighbors and introducing yourselves, and meeting in places of struggle, usually in the lobby of a home or something, or of an apartment, and making this space yours. And from there, like, putting people together in like group chats, making sure people can kind of like, feel comfortable around each other, making spaces where people, start becoming friends with each other, their neighbors, right? And from there, sorry, I lost my train of thought.
No, I think that's so. I mean, I think when I got into this, I put too much weight on being right. I thought I needed the right analysis. It is good to be right. It's fun, but it's also really important to be nice to the people that you want to recruit, to create, I underestimated how much of getting people to hang together is, well, first off, as I said, inviting them in the door, and then helping them want to stay there.
Absolutely.
Actually, one of my baby activist mentors is a woman named Carla Bergman, who actually lives in Vancouver, and she said, Carla? Anyway, she said to me something that's always stuck with me, and she said, people say they leave the movement because they're burnt out, but a lot of times people leave because of hurt feelings. And I think expanding beyond just that insight to like there has to be that affect, right? Some emotional thing that we're getting from being together. And so in the Debt Collective, it can be, well, we might not be able to cancel your debts, we want to, but we can help cast away that shame you feel, right? We can help you feel less, help you have a way to respond to the way that you're made to feel shitty for being poor, right? The way that you're made to feel bad for the choices that you made. We can help you have these moments. Did you say you brought rats to the landlord?
This was the folks at Toronto. But they did do this, yeah.
Yeah, we can help you have experiences where at least you have a wild story you can tell, where you've stuck it to the man. So I think
Absolutely.
I think that aspect, for me, I didn't really appreciate it until I started doing the work.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
and it's also just like being honest, right? Like to do like a rent strike, a lot of folks talk about like the risks, right?
Yes.
You have to be honest about the risks of like what happens. You're gonna get an eviction notice, you're gonna get all of these things. And you have to like sit down and talk to people and say, hey, like you will be putting your housing on the line to do this, but you're doing this for other folks. And it's not uncommon for people you door knock someone and you ask about their issues with their landlord, and they go, oh, the person at 102's music is so loud.
Yeah.
And there's this kind of like your neighbors, and there's this kind of like people. I don't know, people get frustrated, right? But once you kind of like come together and see your neighbor under threat of eviction, when you see your neighbor, the people that you kind of like meet in the hallway every day under threat of like, harassment by their building managers, it's insane how much like people will kind of like change their stance and realize like, oh, I hate the person in 102, but that person cannot leave their home, right? And so, but it's kind of like building that trust and building kind of, being honest and making sure that they're, they know the risks that, they're going into and making these movements. I guess like one last story that I think about a lot, this was kind of like early on, one of the first buildings that I kind of like visited. There was this one first building meeting where these two tenants who lived like above one another sat next to each other. They're both kind of like men in their mid-40s. They never talked to each other. And then in the meeting in the first month, they started talking to each other. Next month, they started talking about hockey. And, they meet each other, and they started talking about hockey, sharing beers. And I think like half a year into their campaign, one of them got really, really sick. And the other drove him to the hospital and stayed with him like all night. And they're neighbors like that never talk to each other, but like now that they know each other, they've slowly built up this solidarity. They've slowly gotten to know each other better, and being a part of a larger movement helped them, I guess, like talk to each other, I suppose.
Amazing. Thank you.
But yeah.
Yeah. No, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So we had some other folks from groups that had said that they would talk about what solidarity feels like and how to build it.
I think next we'll hear from Labor for Palestine.
Hi, my name's Rob. I'm an IBW electrician. IBW stands for International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. And as a unionized electrician, I decided to join our group Labor for Palestine. And so one particularly personal moment of solidarity that I experienced. Sorry. So there was the UBC student encampment for the Palestine protests that happened last summer. No, it was for a period of time, like a month or two. There was a really great feeling at that encampment of like grassroots kind of like, we're protesting, we're doing something, we're creating a really great community here. At least that's how I experienced it. And so one idea that we had, there was myself and another electrician. It was really his idea. He said, hey, these students don't have easy access to charge their phones, to boil a kettle in the morning, to have some breakfast, to charge their loudspeakers so they can go protest one of the administration over there at UBC. So we got some funds together through the National of Labor for Palestine, which I think is in Ottawa. And so they gave us some money to put together like we found on Facebook Marketplace, we found like a solar panel, a little a DC battery bank, and a charge controller, and just to have an autonomous electricity source for these students to be able to cook some breakfast, to boil some water for some tea, charge their phones, charge their speakers so they could protest. And there was one time I stayed overnight there, and I was in a tent. I was really close to where where we set up the solar panel and battery set up there. And I guess there was someone who had family in Gaza, and I overheard them talking. I think there was like 2 or 3 guys in the. I guess they were charging their phone. And he was the one guy who was like, yeah, this totally reminds me of the way they would do solar electricity in Gaza, because they wouldn't have consistent electricity there. So I guess when I personally overheard that, someone that what we had done for the university encampment there for Palestine, and then that made someone think of their situation in Gaza, that for me personally, that was a really touching moment. And so that was a solidarity moment from Labor for Palestine to the student encampment and to the people in Gaza experiencing what they're experiencing. So
I love it. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Another element, I think I'd love to hear more from the people we were talking to about again, what solidarity feels like, or techniques for building it. And then there are also risks of being in coalition. So one thing we were talking about as we prepped for this was, how do we build solidarity that reaches the highest common denominator, right? And not the lowest common denominator. When you're trying to bridge across difference, when you're trying to bring people in, when you're trying to build a majoritarian movement, which is what I think we need to build to fight these fascists, we don't want it to just be, again, the bare minimum of what we can agree on. And this can be hard. For example, in the student debt work, we built a coalition, and many powerful people, we could not get them to budge past, this is kind of in the weeds, but budge past the demand for $50,000 of debt cancellation. We couldn't get them to be full abolitionists. And this was a strategic weakness, but it was one that we didn't have the power to move the coalition around, and that we're still bitter about to this day. Yeah, so anyway, that's another thing I wouldn't mind hearing about. Yeah. How do we raise the bar for each other? Yeah.
I think next we'll go to the Society for Advocacy for Gender Affirming Healthcare. Saga.
Hi. Yeah, I was thinking about the first question mostly you posed, but I'll try and cover the second as well.
Yeah, you can answer whatever you want.
Yeah, I wanted to tell a bit of a story. I'm going to really try to be coherent, but you brought up reactionary solidarity, and I think in 2023 we had a lot of you, I'm sure, remember the Million March for Children, supposedly for children, that was organized supposedly as actually like a multi-faith coalition of it was a very unstable coalition, but to hold these anti-trans, anti-SOGI, especially targeting healthcare for trans youth and access to sexual orientation, gender identities, SOGI education, which we know is extremely important for people to have, reduce rates of bullying, et cetera, et cetera. One of the things about that reactionary solidarity was that it wasn't like the fascism of 1930s Germany. This was like a real like multi-faith and multi-racial coalition, and I think like we often forget that neo-Nazism even from like 2015 till now has really developed in certain ways to become more multiracial, so you had Swana people, you had Muslims, newcomers, there were Hindu nationalists, there were white nationalists, there were like cis gay guys and cis lesbians and TERFs and all of that. So it really wasn't a stable coalition, but they did show up on September 20th in 2023. They were vastly outnumbered in most city centers, but then in Surrey there were especially BIPOC, queer and trans activists who were having being harassed and having things thrown at them, and the police were just standing by. But then October 7th happened, and large parts of these communities, especially the Swana folks, especially the Muslim folks and newcomers, immediately saw that queer and trans people were coming to the defense of Palestinians, and they were coming often to the front lines of escalations, actions, and being really core parts of the movement in solidarity. And we've seen the Queer Coalition for Palestine come up, as well as Queers Against Israeli Apartheid Vancouver, do really, really critical work. And I think that when we look from the perspective of queer and trans organizing, one of the things that we are in sort of contest and contradiction with all the time is how to deal with sort of like the liberalizing, assimilationist, kind of non-profitization of queer and trans healthcare and queer trans rights, and kind of that we can all, hold hands and live happily and be, there's, EDI will save our communities, which we know is not true, but we'll do that as solidarity. So, if you you saw these actions escalate, and you also saw that these actions were, with ACT UP in the States as well, were targeted at, the Human Rights Campaign. Why are we talking about, or doing things and doing work around like the AIDS crisis and this, and we're not addressing, the violence against healthcare workers in Palestine. So, over time, this has grown and this has really developed in really a short span of time. And, we have Queers Against Israeli Apartheid launching the boycott of Vancouver Pride Society, which is, supported by our organization and other organizations, really, really putting to the forefront that, I think also that queer and trans people are SWANA, they are BIPOC, there are Muslim folks who are, so this, kind of immediate recognition of ourselves as, and the rallying cry of like, there can be no trans liberation without Palestinian liberation, this being central, really took the wind out of this, reactionary solidarity that was emerging prior to that moment. So, not wanting to like operationalize that, but the learning being that with like a coherent, with like a passionate recognition with each other and, our shared experiences of marginalization, actually being able to surmount the energy of this reactionary movement. And we saw, the result of that, like, with the Pride Parade last year was disrupted, obviously, as well for, not divesting. And corporate pride has come on under like really, really significant attack along the lines of the BDS movement or in solidarity with BDS. We had the September 20th, come around, and there was a lot of this sort of buzz of like, oh, is this going to happen again? And they didn't show up, right? They didn't really show up in numbers, and I think it shows that there's potential there, and I think, yeah, not to go on and ramble, but I think that Queers for Palestine and that work is so critical, and I wish that more queer health organizations would make those statements. So,
well, thank you so much. Do you have another group, or it's, yeah, okay.
Just passing the mic over here to a comrade.
Hi, I was thinking about your question about what solidarity looks like to me, and I'm a union organizer. I organize bud tenders, so if anybody's a bud tender and you want to organize, come talk to me. But yeah, and I guess like, I feel like as someone who used to be a stoner, I can say this, stoners are very hard to get a hold of, especially over text. And so sometimes I feel like my workers, they don't like me anymore, and that they don't care about this, blah, blah, blah. But then as soon as you get them on like a phone call, there's so much energy, and there's so much like patience and willingness to do the work and unionize and organize, despite all of the shit that the cannabis industry puts bud tenders through. So I guess that's what solidarity looks like to me, is bud tenders, like, through everything, like, and I've heard some really crazy shit of like cannabis managers and doing some really insane things, and so like that's what solidarity looks like to me. Through all of that, like even if I don't get a text back for 3 weeks, if I were to call them and within 5 minutes, it's still after 3 weeks of no response. Yeah, I love to unionize. I already signed my union card. What else do you need from me? Like, yeah, I can talk to this person. I'll text you back, I promise. Sorry, I didn't text you back. So yeah, that's what solidarity looks like to me.
Awesome, I love it. Yeah, we have time. We have time for one more, Gabby, and I think that's just. It does require a bit of thick skin, right? Trying to organize people means you're putting yourself out there. People might say no to your invitation. You have to be persistent. So assume they're just high and too busy to respond.
Is it okay if I...
Yeah.
I'm going to take off my photographer
Break the fourth
hat.
wall.
I'm going to break the fourth wall. My name is Haif Abi Shaheen. I'm from Palestine and Lebanon. I love this question, and I actually just wanted to share, because I have a very concrete example of that that's very relevant for the conversation that was had up on the stage a little while ago. About 14 months ago, I was hired as the the Regional Director of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at Vancouver Coastal Health. And then about 7 days later, a string of formal complaints were lodged against me on account of me being anti-Semitic, dangerous, and ill-suited to have the role. And then about a week later, I was fired from the health authority. That's not what solidarity looks like. But from there came an incredible act of solidarity that is still going. It is an ongoing piece of solidarity. And I just wanted to put arts into this conversation because a friend of mine who wasn't a good friend at the time, in fact, I'd call him an acquaintance. His name is Phil Gray. He's a Tsimshian Cree artist, very well known. He had designed this logo. And he had run, 100 T-shirts of the logo. He had gone to Hobier, which is the Nitska New Year celebration, in February, and he had sold out before, within like 2 hours. He's not a business guy. It was all a fundraiser. It was all donations. But that's kind of the extent of what he could do with it, even though it's actually, in my opinion, going to be iconic. And in 200-300 years, people are going to look back on this image. He designed this specifically in solidarity with Palestinians and incorporating his own indigenous, his own sort of fight for indigenous sovereignty here on his lands. And the act of solidarity I wanted to really highlight in the arts world is he then gifted me this design in order to continue to have it spread, in order for more and more people to see that cross-indigenous solidarity, and because I had just gotten fired, in order to start kind of light a bit of fuel under a bit of a business to support this person who has 2 young children and no job now. And then what was so incredible and what's amazing about networks and people knowing each other and relational work, he would then speak to another artist who is indigenous to Turtle Island, let them know what was going on, and then all of a sudden I was getting a message from them saying, hey, I have this design. I don't, yes, I'll have some artists so they'll get 20% royalty on everything. It's not about taking art from people. It's a very reciprocal thing, but the piece of art is made in solidarity for flagging solidarity. Please take it. Use your skills, so for me, the businessy skills, the design skills, and take it, spread it. That was, a year ago. I don't know how many artists we have now. So it's not always in the front lines. It's not always, there are people who are amazing at fundraising. There are people amazing at everything. So in my experience, solidarity for me, my family, and my family, I mean broad, like my Lebanese, Palestinian family, etc., has been through the arts and through artists and indigenous artists, specifically who are indigenous to Turtle Island. So I really appreciated that conversation earlier, and I just wanted to say that, you can look in all places to invite people in. It's not just what we think of as activism all the time. Art is activism when it's done right. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you. Okay. So yeah, I think that kind of gets to something I wanted to, I think this is very 101, but I think a good thing to think about, like, why are we building the solidarity? We need solidarity so we can build power, and I think we need coercive power to change the system, to fight this fascism. So I just want us to brainstorm together, what kind of power are we trying to build? I heard cultural, artistic power there. Just what other types of power are there? Political power, financial power, artistic power, labor power, for example, right? The power of refusal, of non-cooperation. And one of them is, you said political power, but electoral power. And y'all are about to have an election, I hear. And so I just want to come really honestly with a warning from the United States because we're fucked. We are having to, I've been fighting to abolish student debt. Well, now they're abolishing the Department of Education and the entire fucking government. And so, you know what? We're now having to defend these liberal institutions, right? Because also, the liberals don't know how to organize. So they're calling us, right? We are having to think about defending food safety. All of the people I know are getting fired. We were right that that they're not just coming for trans folks. They're not just coming for lesbian dance theory professors, right? They're coming for everybody. And so I just want to say how important it is to not trust the polls and to not wind up in a situation where you're fighting these rearguard actions, because the reactionary solidarity, as we've explored, is global, and they're learning from each other. They're sharing techniques. I got chills when I saw that stupid fucking letter about land acknowledgements, EDI, the lawsuit happening. They're clowns right now, but that's connected to a bigger strategy that is about attacking, higher education, attacking the public sector more broadly. This is so visceral. I came here from a conference at Harvard University yesterday. I had to be like, we must defend Harvard. I want to nationalize Harvard. So, this is really, I'm so serious that it is, do not trust the polls, do not be complacent. And I also think that there is opportunity, though, in this moment, because a lot of people are kind of seeing that some of these warnings were right on, and that maybe they're not as safe as they thought. And that maybe democracy isn't just the rule of law and procedures, that maybe it's something more egalitarian, more substantive. And I think there's incredible potential to bring more people into radical movements. And to do that, we need to build solidarity. We need strategies. We need to stick to them over years, over decades. And we need a vision of a better horizon. Because it's not just utopian, it's not just extra. It actually really motivates people to fight for something bigger than themselves, and also better than what they were experiencing yesterday or last week or a few months ago. And to me, that vision is one that actually should have solidarity at the center. I love to quote Margaret Thatcher, who is not a friend, but she said, "Economics is the method, the point is to change the soul." And she knew that when you change policies, you change people, right? When you read Project 2025, which people act like that's brand new, it's been coming out since 1981, right? They're basically saying we need to seize the power of the state, not to destroy all of it. We want to keep the punitive aspects so we can roll back the great awakening and impose a culture of blessedness. They want to use the state to reshape, if not our souls, our actions, because we won't have any choice but to work in the private sector because there will be no public sector, right? We won't have any choice but to worry about ourselves because we don't have any health care, we don't have any social security, we are being surveilled by Palantir 24 hours a day. So we should build the opposite of that horrible vision, which is a society in which solidarity is the method. And the point is to free the soul, to free people to be their best and highest selves. And that is what they're afraid of. And I think that out of the despair and the real sadness of this moment, because I have so much of that, we have to find the potential and actualize it. And being in this room today, I just want to say, has been such a balm. Somebody said it was a sob, and it really has been for me. So thank you all for inviting me.